Abandoned while pregnant, she receives an unexpected offer to look after the paralyzed son of a millionaire. But one day, when he gets home early, he comes across something he never imagined. Watch until the end to see how this story turns out. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like this video and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The ancient palace loomed before Emma Sullivan like a testament to faded glory. Its weathered stone facade catching the first light of dawn. Her trembling fingers clutched the wrinkled newspaper advertisement as she stood at the ornate iron gates, her other hand instinctively resting on her swollen belly. At 26, life had stripped away her dreams one by one, leaving her with nothing but the promise held in those few printed lines. Live-in caregiver needed, room and board provided, experience with teenagers preferred. The morning air carried a hint of spring, but Emma barely noticed as she pressed the intercom button. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she waited, counting the seconds that stretched into an eternity. The crackle of static made her jump, and a stern female voice demanded, "Yes?" "I'm Emma Sullivan. I'm here about the caregiver position." She fought to keep her voice steady, professional, despite the desperation clawing at her insides. The last few months had been a blur of closed doors and rejected applications, her growing pregnancy making each opportunity more elusive than the last. The gates swung open with a metallic groan, revealing a winding driveway flanked by meticulously maintained topiary. Emma's sensible shoes crunched on the gravel as she made her way toward the entrance, each step carrying the weight of her circumstances. 6 months pregnant, abandoned by the man who had promised her the world, and down to her last few dollars. This wasn't just a job interview, it was her last chance. The massive wooden doors opened before she could knock, revealing a tall woman with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her expression was as starched as her uniform, and her eyes performed a quick clinical assessment of Emma's appearance. "Mrs. Martinez," she introduced herself curtly. "Follow me." The interior of the palace was a study in preserved grandeur. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across marble floors, and priceless artwork adorned walls covered in silk damask. But there was something hollow about the opulence, as if the soul had been stripped from the space, leaving behind only empty perfection. Emma was led through a maze of corridors, each more impressive than the last, until they reached what appeared to be a study. The room was dominated by a massive desk, behind which stood a man whose presence seemed to fill the space without effort. Alexander Crawford's reputation preceded him, a brilliant businessman, a recluse since the accident that had changed his family forever, and now potentially her employer. "Mr. Crawford will conduct the interview," Mrs. Martinez announced before disappearing, closing the door with a decisive click. Alexander Crawford's dark eyes fixed on Emma with an intensity that made her want to shrink back. Instead, she straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. She had nothing left to lose, and sometimes she had learned that was its own kind of strength. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question, but rather a statement of fact delivered, in a voice that carried both authority and a hint of something deeper, pain perhaps, or resignation. "Yes, sir." 6 months. Emma refused to apologize for her condition, though she knew it would likely cost her this opportunity, as it had so many others. "And you believe you can handle the physical demands of caring for a teenager in a wheelchair while managing your own pregnancy?" His tone was skeptical but not dismissive. "I believe I can do more than handle it, Mr. Crawford. I believe I can make a difference." The words came from somewhere deep inside her, carrying all the conviction she had left. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "My son Lucas has been through 3 caregivers in the past month. He's challenging. The accident that put him in that wheelchair took more than his ability to walk. It took his trust, his joy, his belief in the future." Emma felt something shift in the air between them as Alexander's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing a glimpse of the father beneath. "I understand loss, Mr. Crawford, and I understand that sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought against physical limitations, but against the belief that nothing will ever be right again." The silence that followed her words was heavy with unspoken understanding. Alexander moved from behind his desk, his movements deliberate as he approached her. "Mrs. Martinez will show you to Lucas's wing of the house. You'll spend the next hour with him. If you still want the position after that, and if he hasn't run you off, we can discuss terms." As Emma followed Mrs. Martinez back into the corridor, she could feel Alexander Crawford's gaze following her. She had seen something in his eyes during their brief interaction, a desperate hope warring with resignation, a father's love tangled with helplessness. What she couldn't know then was how that moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would transform not only her life, but the lives of everyone within those palace walls. The first thing Emma noticed about Lucas Crawford's suite was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of contentment, but rather the heavy stillness of isolation. The room itself was a teenager's paradise, state-of-the-art gaming systems, a massive television, and enough technology to run a small company. But everything felt untouched, gathering dust like abandoned dreams. Lucas sat in his wheelchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the door. At 16, he should have been full of life and attitude, but his posture spoke of defeat. He didn't turn when Mrs. Martinez announced Emma's presence, didn't acknowledge her when the housekeeper left them alone. "I'm Emma," she offered into the silence, moving slowly into his line of sight. "Your father asked me to spend some time with you." "Don't bother getting comfortable." Lucas's voice was flat, practiced in its dismissal. "You won't last the hour." He finally turned to look at her, his features arranged in a mask of indifference that couldn't quite hide the pain beneath. His eyes, so like his father's, widened slightly at the sight of her pregnancy before narrowing in calculated disdain. "Did my father mention that the last caregiver left in tears, or that the one before her quit after 3 days?" Emma pulled up a chair, settling herself carefully. "Actually, he did mention that. He also mentioned that you're challenging. I think that's a good thing. Challenges keep life interesting." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Interesting? Is that what you call this?" He gestured to his wheelchair, to the sophisticated medical equipment discreetly arranged around the room. "Let me guess, you're going to tell me that everything happens for a reason, that I should stay positive, that with enough determination, I can overcome anything." "No," Emma replied simply. "I'm not going to tell you any of that. What happened to you is unfair, and it's okay to be angry about it. I'm not here to feed you inspirational quotes or pretend that everything is fine when it isn't." Lucas's practiced indifference faltered for a moment, caught off guard by her honesty. "Then why are you here?" "Because I need this job," Emma admitted, her hand resting on her belly. "And because maybe if we're both honest about how much life can hurt, we can figure out how to move forward together." "Honest?" Lucas's laugh was sharper this time. "You want honest? Fine. I hate these walls. I hate being trapped in this chair. I hate the way my father can barely look at me anymore, and how everyone tiptoes around me like I'm made of glass. I hate that my mother—" He stopped abruptly, his hands gripping his wheelchair's armrests until his knuckles turned white. Emma leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Then let's start there. With the hate, with the anger, with the truth. No sugarcoating, no pretending." For the first time, Lucas really looked at her, seeing past his own pain, to notice the shadows under her eyes, the worry lines around her mouth, the way she carried herself like someone used to bearing heavy burdens alone. "You're not like the others," he observed, more to himself than to her. "No, I'm not. And you're not just another job to me, Lucas. We're both stuck in situations we didn't choose, dealing with circumstances that seem impossible. Maybe we can be honest about that too." A long moment passed between them, the silence now charged with possibility rather than resignation. Lucas wheeled himself closer, his movements precise and controlled. "You said you need this job. Why?" Emma's hand tightened protectively around her unborn child. "Because sometimes the people we trust the most let us down in ways we never expected. Because I refuse to give up on my baby just because its father gave up on us. Because this palace, as grand and intimidating as it is, might be the only chance I have left at building a future." Something shifted in Lucas's expression. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the first crack in the walls he had built around himself. "The physical therapy equipment is over there," he said, gesturing to a corner of the room. "If you're staying, you should know that I hate the exercises. I'll probably curse at you, and I definitely won't make it easy." A small smile tugged at Emma's lips. "I wouldn't expect anything less. Should we get started?" As Emma helped, Lucas positioned himself for his exercises. She could feel Alexander Crawford's presence at the door, watching silently. She didn't turn around, focusing instead on establishing the delicate trust beginning to form between her and Lucas. She couldn't see the way Alexander's expression softened as he observed them, or how his hands unclenched at his sides for the first time in months. But she could sense that something had shifted in the palace's atmosphere, like the first warm breeze after a long winter, promising change and the possibility of renewal. A week into her new position, Emma found herself settling into a routine at the palace. Each morning began with Lucas's physical therapy, followed by his online classes, and then whatever activities she could convince him to participate in. While the teenager's resistance hadn't completely dissolved, small victories emerged like spring flowers through frost, a genuine laugh during their chess matches, a moment of pride when he mastered a new exercise, a question about her day that wasn't laced with sarcasm. But it was the quiet moments in the evening that began to shift something deeper within the palace's walls. After Lucas retired to his room, Emma often found herself in the vast library, where ancient leather-bound books lined shelves that stretched to the ceiling. It was there that Alexander Crawford began to seek her out, their conversation starting with Lucas's progress, but gradually expanding into something more. "He smiled today," Alexander remarked one evening, his fingers tracing the spine of a first-edition novel. "Actually smiled, I hadn't seen that since." He trailed off, the weight of unspoken memories hanging in the air between them. Emma settled carefully into one of the library's plush armchairs, her growing belly making every movement more deliberate. "He's starting to trust again, Mr. Crawford. It takes time, but it's happening." "Alexander," he corrected softly. "After all you've done this past week, I think we can dispense with formalities." He paused, studying her with that intense gaze that still made her heart skip. "You never asked about the accident." "It wasn't my place," Emma replied simply. "Some stories need to be offered, not demanded." Alexander moved to the window, his silhouette stark against the gathering dusk. It was supposed to be a celebration. Lucas had just won his first major tennis tournament. Catherine, my wife, insisted on driving him home herself, wanting those precious minutes alone with him to express her pride. His voice caught, and Emma felt her chest tighten with empathy. The other driver was texting. He ran a red light. Catherine, she didn't survive, and Lucas... Emma rose from her chair, moving to stand beside him at the window. "Lucas survived because of her," she said gently. "That's not just a medical fact, is it? It's what haunts him." Alexander turned to her, surprise flickering across his features. "How did you know?" "I see it in the way he talks about that day, or rather, doesn't talk about it. The guilt of survival can be as paralyzing as any physical injury." Emma's hand rested on her belly, her own memories surfacing. "We all carry weights we never asked for." "Like the father of your child?" Alexander's question was careful, tentative, as if he'd been wanting to ask since her arrival but hadn't found the right moment. Emma's laugh held no humor. James Monroe, successful real estate developer, champion of charitable causes, and apparently skilled at maintaining multiple lives simultaneously. She met Alexander's gaze directly. "When I told him about the pregnancy, he offered me money to take care of it and disappear, said he couldn't risk his reputation or his marriage. When I refused, he made sure I lost my job and my apartment. His lawyers made it clear that fighting him would be futile. And yet you didn't give up." "This baby is innocent," Emma said fiercely. "It deserves a chance at life, at love, at everything good this world has to offer. Just like Lucas deserves. To believe in possibilities again, even if getting there hurts like hell." Alexander's hand moved as if to touch her shoulder, then dropped back to his side. "You've brought something back to this house, Emma, something I thought was lost forever. Lucas isn't the only one who's starting to remember how to hope." the so. A moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Emma felt her pulse quicken as Alexander stepped closer, his presence both comforting and unsettling. But before either could speak, Mrs. Martinez appeared in the doorway, her expression troubled. "Mr. Crawford, there's a situation with Lucas. He's refusing his evening medication and—" She hesitated, glancing at Emma. "He's asking for his mother." The spell broke. Alexander's face closed off, the vulnerable man of moments ago replaced by the controlled businessman. But as he turned to leave, Emma caught his arm. "Let me," she said softly. "Sometimes it's easier to fall apart with someone who isn't carrying the same wounds." Alexander studied her for a long moment before nodding. As Emma made her way to Lucas's wing, she could feel Alexander's gaze following her, much like that first day. But now it carried a different weight, one that spoke of trust beginning to bloom in the midst of shared pain. What she couldn't know then was that their conversation in the library had been overheard by someone whose presence would soon shatter the delicate peace they were building. Outside the palace gates, a figure stood in the shadows, watching, waiting, planning to reclaim what they believed was rightfully theirs. The next morning would bring more than just sunrise to the palace's doors. It would bring a storm that would test every fragile bond forming within its walls. Emma found Lucas in his darkened room, his wheelchair positioned by the window where rain had begun to fall, matching his mood. His fingers gripped the armrests with white-knuckled intensity, and in the dim light, she could see the tracks of tears on his cheeks. "I don't want the medication," he said before she could speak, his voice raw. "I don't want any of it. I don't want to sleep. I don't want to dream. I don't want to wake up tomorrow and remember all over again that she's gone." Instead of arguing, Emma pulled up a chair beside him. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "Tell me about your mum." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. No one had asked him that before. They all knew Catherine Crawford, or thought they did. The socialite, the philanthropist, the perfect wife and mother. But they didn't know her the way he did. "She used to sing," he started, the words coming slowly at first, then faster like a dam breaking. Terrible off-key singing, especially in the car. She knew it was awful, but she didn't care. Said life was too short to worry about perfect pitch. A broken laugh escaped him. She was right about that, wasn't she? Emma reached out, placing her hand next to his on the armrest, close enough to offer comfort, but not demanding contact. "What else?" She came to every tennis match, every practice. Even when Dad was too busy, she was there. That last tournament, his voice cracked. I was mad at her, can you believe that? She was cheering too loudly, embarrassing me in front of everyone. I ignored her after the match, barely spoke to her in the car. And then you never got to take it back, Emma finished gently. Never got to tell her you were sorry or that you loved her, or that her cheering was actually the best part of winning. Lucas turned to her sharply. How do you know? How do you always know? Because regret is universal, Lucas. We all carry words we wish we'd said, moments we wish we could change. She shifted in her chair, wincing slightly as her baby kicked. But you know what else is universal? Love. The kind that doesn't need perfect moments or perfect words. The kind your mother had for you. The kind that made her protect you until the very end. But I didn't deserve it, Lucas whispered, the core of his pain finally exposed. I was horrible to her that day. Why did she save me? Why not herself? Because that's what mothers do, Emma said, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. We protect our children no matter what. Your mother's last act wasn't a judgment of your worth, Lucas. It was a testament to how much she loved you, how much she believed in your future. For the first time since the accident, Lucas allowed himself to really cry. Not the quiet tears of isolation, but deep, racking sobs that shook his entire body. Emma moved closer, offering her presence as an anchor in his storm of grief. When the sobs finally subsided, Lucas looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. I miss her so much it physically hurts. And Dad, he can barely look at me. I think he wishes she'd saved herself instead. No, Emma said firmly. Your father is drowning in his own grief, but not because he wishes you hadn't survived. He's struggling because he doesn't know how to help you carry this pain. He's afraid of failing the gift your mother left him, you." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he reached for the medicine cup on his bedside table. "She would want me to keep fighting, wouldn't she? To get stronger, to—" He swallowed hard. "To live." "Yes," Emma said simply. "She would." After Lucas had taken his medication and settled into bed, Emma made her way back to the library. She found Alexander there, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, staring at a family portrait on the wall. "He's sleeping," she said softly. "And he took his medicine." Alexander turned to her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "How do you do it? How do you reach him when I can't?" "Because I'm not afraid of his pain," Emma replied. "Or yours." The honesty of her words hung between them, heavy with implication. Alexander set down his glass and crossed the room to her, his movements deliberate. This time, when his hand moved to touch her shoulder, he didn't pull back. But the moment was shattered by Mrs. Martinez's hurried entrance. "Mr. Crawford," she said, her usual composure slipping. "There's someone at the gate. They're demanding to see Miss Sullivan. They say they're the father of her baby." Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her feet as Alexander's hand tightened protectively on her shoulder. Outside, the storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke, lightning illuminating the palace grounds in stark flashes that revealed a familiar figure at the gates, James Monroe, looking nothing like the polished businessman who had once promised her the world. The peace they had been building was about to be tested in ways none of them could have anticipated. As thunder rolled overhead, Emma realized that the real storm wasn't the one raging outside. It was the one about to break within the palace walls, threatening everything and everyone she had come to care about. The security footage on Alexander's office monitor showed James Monroe pacing at the gates like a caged animal, his expensive suit soaked through by the relentless rain. Emma stood behind Alexander's chair, her arms wrapped protectively around her middle, while Mrs. Martinez hovered anxiously by the door. "I won't let him in," Alexander stated firmly, his jaw set. "One word from you, Emma, and security will escort him off the property." Emma's heart raced as she watched James on the screen. Gone was the polished charm that had once swept her off her feet, replaced by something desperate and unpredictable. "He won't go away," she said softly. "I know him. He'll keep coming back, making scenes, maybe even going to the press. His reputation means everything to him, but he's not above destroying others to protect it." "Let him try," Alexander's voice carried steel. "My legal team—" "No," Emma interrupted, straightening her spine. "I need to face him. I've been running long enough." Alexander rose from his chair, turning to face her. "You don't owe him anything, Emma. Not an explanation, not your time, and certainly not your fear." Their eyes met, and Emma felt strength flow into her from his steady gaze. "I know, but I owe it to myself and to my baby to stand up to him, once and for all." After a long moment, Alexander nodded. "We'll receive him in the formal sitting room. Mrs. Martinez, please have security standing by. And Emma—" His hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You're not alone anymore." The sitting room, with its gilt-edged mirrors and antique furniture, felt like a stage set for the confrontation to come. Emma sat in a high-backed chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap, while Alexander stood by the fireplace, his presence both protective and imposing. When James was shown in, his wet footprints marring the pristine marble floor, the contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. "Well, well," James sneered, running a hand through his dripping hair. "Quite a step up from that little apartment of yours, isn't it, Emma? I should have known you'd land on your feet, always the survivor, aren't you?" "What do you want, James?" Emma's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. "What do I want?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I want to know why you're here in one of the most prestigious addresses in the city, working for one of its most prominent families. I want to know if you're planning to use that baby, my baby, to extort money from me. And I want to make sure you understand exactly what will happen if you try." Alexander took a step forward, but Emma raised a hand to stop him. This was her battle. "Your baby?" She stood slowly, one hand resting on her belly. "You lost any right to call this child yours the moment you offered me money to take care of the problem. You made your choice, James. You chose your reputation, your marriage, your perfect life. I chose my baby." "Don't play innocent, James." Spat. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your new position? That I wouldn't wonder what game you're playing?" "The only person playing games is you," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength. I'm here because I needed a job, and because there's a young man upstairs who needs my help, that's all. I haven't contacted your wife, your business partners, or the press. I haven't asked you for anything, and I never will." James moved closer, his face twisted with something between rage and fear. "You expect me to believe—" "Step back," Alexander's command cut through the tension like a blade. "You've said your piece. Now leave." "And who are you to give me orders?" James turned, his attention to Alexander, sizing him up. The reclusive widower, hiding away in his palace while the world moves on. "Tell me, what exactly is your interest in my former associate?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as Alexander stepped forward. "My interest, Mr. Monroe, is in protecting the people under my roof. Emma and her child are under my protection now. If you threaten them again, if you so much as appear at my gates, you'll discover exactly how much influence I still have in this city." Something flickered in James's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or fear. Everyone in the business world knew the Crawford name and the power it still wielded. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "I won't let you use my mistake to your advantage." "Your mistake?" Emma's quiet words stopped him at the door. "This baby is not a mistake, it's a gift, one you'll never deserve to know." After James was escorted out, Emma's carefully maintained composure crumbled. Her knees buckled, and Alexander caught her before she could fall, guiding her gently back to the chair. Mrs. Martinez appeared with a cup of tea, her usually stern face softened with concern. "I've never stood up to him before," Emma whispered, her hands shaking as she accepted the tea. "I was always too afraid." "You were magnificent," Alexander said softly, kneeling beside her chair. "But he'll be back. Men like that don't give up easily." "I know." Emma's free hand found his, drawing comfort from his strength. "But next time I'll be stronger. We all will be." Neither of them noticed Lucas's wheelchair in the doorway, or the thoughtful expression on his face as he watched their clasped hands. The teenager wheeled himself silently back to his room, his mind working through everything he'd overheard. For the first time since the accident, he felt something stir inside him, a desire to protect, to fight back, to be part of something bigger than his own pain. The storm outside had begun to ease, but within the palace walls the real tempest was just beginning. James Monroe's appearance had changed everything, bringing not just threats and fear, but also the possibility of unexpected alliances and newfound courage. As Emma finally let herself lean into Alexander's support, she realized that sometimes the biggest battles brought out the strongest bonds and the most surprising heroes. The morning after James Monroe's appearance brought an unexpected shift in the palace's dynamics. Emma arrived at Lucas's room for their usual physical therapy session to find him already dressed and waiting, a determined set to his jaw that reminded her startlingly of his father. "I want to try the new exercises today," he announced before she could speak, "the ones Dr. Chen suggested for building upper body strength." Emma tried to hide her surprise at his sudden enthusiasm. For weeks, she'd been trying to convince him to attempt the more challenging routine. "Are you sure? They're quite demanding." "And I'm sure," Lucas cut her off, wheeling himself toward the exercise area. "I need to be stronger for—" He hesitated, then finished softly, "for all of us." The meaning behind his words hit Emma like a physical force. "You were there last night. You saw what happened with James." Lucas nodded, beginning his warm-up stretches with unusual focus. "I heard everything. The way he threatened you, the way Dad defended you. His hands stilled on the resistance bands. The way you stood up to him, even though you were scared." Emma knelt beside his wheelchair, meeting his eyes directly. "Lucas, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do," he insisted. "For months I've been wrapped up in my own pain, my own loss. But last night, watching you and Dad, I realized something. Strength isn't just about muscles or physical ability. It's about standing up for the people you care about, even when you're terrified." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, but she blinked them back. "Your mother would be proud of you, you know, not just for wanting to get stronger, but for understanding what real strength means." A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. "She always said that family wasn't about blood. It was about who you chose to fight for." He reached out, hesitantly touching Emma's rounded belly. "This baby, it's going to need protecting from him, and maybe I could help with that." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Martinez's arrival, her usual efficiency tinged with obvious concern. "Miss Sullivan, Mr. Crawford requests your presence in his study immediately. There's been a development." Emma found Alexander in his study, pacing between towering bookshelves with a newspaper clutched in his hand. His expression was thunderous. "Have you seen this?" he demanded, thrusting the paper toward her. The headline made her blood run cold. "Crawford heirs caregiver, hiding shocking secret. Pregnant assistant's connection to prominent developer raises questions." "He works fast," Emma whispered, sinking into a chair as she scanned the article. It was carefully worded to avoid outright libel, but the implications were clear. She was portrayed as a gold digger, using her pregnancy to infiltrate the Crawford household for financial gain. "I've already called my lawyers," Alexander said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We can sue for defamation, but that's exactly what he wants," Emma finished. "A legal battle that will drag everyone's names through the mud. He's betting that you'll want to avoid the publicity, that you'll pressure me to leave to protect your family's reputation." Alexander stopped pacing, turning to face her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are part of this family now, Emma. You and your child. I won't let him drive you away." The conviction in his voice made something warm bloom in her chest, but fear still clouded her thoughts. "Alexander, I can't let him destroy everything you've built. Your business, your reputation, are worth nothing compared to what you've given us," he interrupted, crossing the room to kneel before her chair. "In the months since you arrived, I've watched my son come back to life. I've seen him smile, again heard him laugh, and He reached up, cupping her face with a gentleness that belied his strength. "I've remembered what it feels like to hope, to care, to want a future that's more than just existing." Emma leaned into his touch, her heart racing. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not for myself, but for what he might do. James is powerful, connected. He won't stop until—" The study door opened, interrupting her words. Lucas wheeled himself in, followed by Mrs. Martinez, who was unsuccessfully trying to stop him. "I have an idea," he announced, his eyes bright with purpose, "about how to handle Monroe." Alexander straightened, but didn't move away from Emma. "Lucas, you shouldn't worry about—" "Mom would want me to help," Lucas said firmly, "and I think I know how. Remember Jeremy Chen? Your mother's godson." Alexander frowned. "The investigative reporter?" Lucas nodded, a hint of his old smile playing at his lips. "He's been trying to reach out to me since the accident, but I've been pushing everyone away. Maybe it's time I talked to him. Maybe it's time we all did." Emma looked between father and son, seeing the same determination mirrored in their faces. In that moment, she realized that James Monroe had made a crucial mistake. He thought he was dealing with a vulnerable, isolated woman he could easily intimidate. Instead, he had unknowingly united a broken family, giving them a common purpose and a reason to fight back. As Alexander and Lucas began discussing strategy, Emma felt her baby kick, as if responding to the surge of hope in the room. The palace that had once felt like her last resort had become something else entirely. A fortress of protection, a place of healing, and most surprisingly, a true home. The battle ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since James had reappeared in her life, Emma felt truly unafraid. She had found her family, and together they would face whatever storms came their way. Jeremy Chen arrived at the palace on a bright Sunday morning, his journalist's notebook tucked under his arm and compassion in his dark eyes. Emma watched from the library window as Lucas wheeled himself out to meet his mother's godson, Alexander hovering protectively nearby. It was the first time Lucas had willingly received a visitor since the accident, and the significance of the moment wasn't lost on any of them. "He looks so much like Catherine," Mrs. Martinez murmured, appearing silently beside Emma with a tray of coffee. The housekeeper's usual stern demeanor had softened over the past days, her protective instincts extending beyond Lucas to include Emma and her unborn child. She would be proud of him today. Emma turned from the window, accepting a cup of coffee with a grateful smile. "He's stronger than he knows. They both are." She watched as Jeremy embraced Lucas, the teenager stiffening for a moment before returning the hug. "I just hope this plan works." "It will," Mrs. Martinez said with surprising conviction. "The truth has a way of finding its light." The meeting moved to Alexander's study, where Emma joined them. Jeremy's initial shock at her pregnant condition quickly gave way to professional interest as they explained the situation with James Monroe. "Let me get this straight," Jeremy said, his pen moving rapidly across his notebook. A prominent real estate developer, known for his charitable work and family values, not only abandoned his pregnant girlfriend, but actively tried to force her to terminate the pregnancy, and now he's using his media connections to smear her reputation. "That's only part of it," Lucas interjected, his voice stronger than Emma had ever heard it. "He threatened her here in our home. I heard everything. He tried to intimidate her, to scare her away." Jeremy's eyebrows rose as he looked between them. "And you're willing to go on record with this, all of you?" "Yes," Emma said quietly. "Not for revenge, but for protection. He needs to understand that he can't control this narrative anymore." Alexander moved to stand behind Emma's chair, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. "We have security footage of his visit, documentation of his earlier attempts to pay Emma off, and witnesses to his behavior. But more importantly, we have the truth." Jeremy sat back, studying them thoughtfully. "You know this won't be easy. Monroe has friends in high places, connections that could make life difficult for all of you." "Life's already been difficult," Lucas said, wheeling closer to Emma. "But running away and hiding doesn't make things better. Mom taught me that." He paused, swallowing hard. "She also taught me that family protects each other. Emma and her baby are family now." Emma felt tears threatening and blinked them back. The fierce protectiveness in Lucas's voice, so different from the angry, withdrawn boy she'd first met, touched something deep in her heart. "There's something else you should know," Alexander added, his voice carrying a note of steel. "Monroe's charitable foundation has been bidding on city contracts for affordable housing developments, contracts that coincidentally always seem to fall through after he receives the initial funding." Jeremy's pen stilled. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that a thorough investigation into James Monroe might reveal more than just a personal scandal. My legal team has been gathering information." Alexander's grip on Emma's shoulder tightened slightly. He chose the wrong family to threaten. The meeting stretched into the afternoon, with Jeremy taking detailed notes and asking probing questions. By the time he left, the outline of their counterattack was clear. The story would break in stages. First, a sympathetic piece about Emma and the Crawford family's journey of healing, then a deeper investigation into Monroe's business practices and charitable foundations. As they watched Jeremy's car disappear down the driveway, Emma felt a mix of relief and apprehension. "There's no going back now, is there?" "No," Alexander agreed, turning to face her. "But we're in this together, all of us." Lucas wheeled between them, reaching for both their hands. "Mum used to say that the hardest battles show us who our real allies are." He squeezed their fingers. "I think she'd be happy about this, about us." Later that evening, after Lucas had retired to his room, Emma found Alexander in the library again. He stood at the window, his posture tense with protective determination. "Should have asked," he said without turning. If you were ready for this fight, I don't want you to feel pressured into a public battle just because we're willing to wage it." Emma moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching lightly. "You didn't pressure me into anything. You and Lucas, you gave me something I haven't had in a long time. A reason to stop running, a place to stand and fight." Alexander turned to her then, his eyes intense in the fading light. "Emma, I need you to know something. Whatever happens with Monroe, whatever stories come out, my feelings for you aren't part of this battle. They're real and they're growing stronger every day." Her heart skipped as he reached for her hand. "Alexander, you don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I just needed you to know. Whatever storm is coming, my heart is already yours." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the palace grounds in shades of gold and promise. Emma leaned into Alexander's strength, feeling her baby move as if responding to the moment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, in the quiet of the library, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a love strong enough to weather any storm. What none of them could know was that James Monroe was already planning his own counterattack. In his office across town, he was making calls, pulling strings, and preparing to unleash a wave of revelations that would test not only their strategy, but the very bonds they were building. The real battle was just beginning, and it would require more than just truth to win. It would demand courage, trust, and a love strong enough to overcome the darkest of pasts. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, splashed across the front page of the city's most respected newspaper. "Healing and Hope, the Crawford family's journey of love and redemption," read the headline, accompanied by a carefully staged photograph of Lucas, Alexander, and Emma in the palace gardens. Jeremy had done a masterful job, weaving together their stories of loss, resilience, and unexpected connection into a narrative that touched hearts, while hinting at darker truths to come. Emma sat in the kitchen, reading the article for the third time, while Mrs. Martinez stress-baked enough muffins to feed an army. The housekeeper's nervous energy was understandable. They were all waiting for James Monroe's reaction. "He'll try to discredit you," Mrs. Martinez said, sliding another tray into the oven. "Men like that always do." "I know," Emma replied, rubbing her growing belly absently, "but this time I'm ready." The sound of wheels on hardwood announced Lucas's arrival. He looked different today, shoulders straight, chin up, a hint of his mother's determination in his eyes. "Dad's been on the phone all morning," he reported, snagging a warm muffin. "Apparently the story's already making waves. 3 of Monroe's business partners have called, asking questions about his charitable foundation." Emma felt a flutter of hope. Jeremy mentioned he's been getting tips from anonymous sources, people who've been afraid to speak up until now. "Like you were," Lucas said softly, reaching for her hand. "Until you found your strength. Until you found us." The moment was interrupted by Alexander's arrival, his face grave. "Monroe's called a press conference for this afternoon. His office is saying it's about setting the record straight." Emma's heart clenched, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do you think he'll say?" "Nothing we haven't prepared for," Alexander assured her, moving to stand behind her. Chair. His presence, solid and unwavering, helped steady her nerves. "The legal team is ready, and Jeremy has his follow-up piece ready to go, depending on Monroe's angle of attack." Lucas wheeled closer to the kitchen island, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking, maybe I should speak at the hospital fundraiser next week, tell my story, including how Emma helped me find my way back." Both Emma and Alexander turned to him in surprise. The annual fundraiser for the rehabilitation center, where Lucas received treatment, was a major social event, one he had refused to attend since the accident. "Lucas, you don't have to," Emma began, but he cut her off. "Yes, I do. Monroe wants to paint you as some kind of gold digger who manipulated her way into our lives. But I can tell them the truth. How you helped me when I was lost in darkness. How you taught me that strength comes in many forms." His voice grew stronger with each word. "Mom would want me to stand up for what's right." Alexander moved to his son's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure about this? There will be press, cameras." "I'm sure," Lucas said firmly. It's time I stopped hiding. Mum never hid from a fight that mattered, and neither will I. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparation. Alexander's legal team arrived with documents and strategies, while Jeremy called regularly with updates from his sources. By early afternoon, they were gathered in Alexander's study, watching Monroe's press conference on the large wall-mounted screen. James looked impeccable as always, his expression carefully crafted to convey dignified hurt as he addressed the cameras. I've called this conference to address certain allegations that have been made against me, he began. While I regret any pain my past actions may have caused, I feel it's important to clarify the nature of my relationship with Miss Sullivan. Emma felt Alexander's hand slip into hers as James continued, spinning a tale of manipulation and deceit. According to him, she had been the one to suggest termination, hoping to leverage the situation for financial gain. When that failed, he claimed she had targeted the Crawford family, using their vulnerability to establish herself in their household. What he doesn't know, Alexander whispered in her ear, is that we have proof. Every email, every threat, every attempt at coercion, all documented and ready to be revealed. And he doesn't know about the Foundation investigations, Lucas added, his eyes fixed on the screen. Jeremy's story tomorrow will change everything. As they watched Monroe continue his performance, Emma felt something shift inside her, not just her baby moving, but a deeper change. The fear that had driven her for so long was being replaced by something stronger, the certainty that she was no longer alone, no longer running, no longer powerless. Later that evening, after the press conference had been dissected and strategies refined, Emma found herself in the palace gardens. The setting sun painted the old stones in shades of amber and rose, and the air was heavy with the scent of blooming flowers. She heard Alexander's approach before she saw him, his footsteps, deliberately loud to avoid startling her. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked, joining her on the stone bench. "I was thinking about how different everything is now," she replied, leaning slightly against his shoulder. "A few months ago, I was alone and terrified. Now," she gestured to the palace, to the life they were building. "Now, I have a family worth fighting for." Alexander turned to face her, his expression serious. "We're going to win this, Emma. Not just the battle with Monroe, but the war for happiness, for love." His hand found her face, thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the day you stood in my study and refused to back down." Emma's heart soared even as tears threatened. "I think I've been falling in love with you since you first trusted me with your son's heart," she whispered. As Alexander drew her into a gentle kiss, neither of them noticed Lucas watching from his window above, a smile of approval on his face. The teenager wheeled himself back from the window, picking up his mother's photograph from his bedside table. "You'd like her, Mom," he said softly to the picture. "She makes us whole again." The night settled over the palace like a protective blanket, wrapping its inhabitants in momentary peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new tests of their growing bonds. But for now, in the quiet of the evening, love was winning, and that was all that mattered. The morning of the hospital fundraiser arrived with an electric tension in the air. Emma stood in her room, studying her reflection in the full-length mirror. The elegant maternity gown Alexander had insisted on buying her flowed gracefully over her 7-month belly, making her feel both beautiful and vulnerable. Tonight would be her first public appearance since Jeremy's article, and she knew all eyes would be on her. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Martinez's entrance. The housekeeper carried a small velvet box, her usually stern expression softened with emotion. "Mrs. Crawford, Catherine, would have wanted you to have this for tonight," she said, opening the box to reveal a delicate pearl necklace. "She wore it to every important event, said it gave her strength." Emma's fingers trembled as she touched the pearls. "I couldn't possibly—" "Yes, you can," came Lucas's voice from the doorway. He wheeled himself in, dressed in a sharp suit that made him look older, more confident. "Mum would have loved you, Emma. She would have been proud to see you wearing her pearls." Mrs. Martinez helped secure the necklace around Emma's throat while Lucas watched, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You look like a real Crawford," he said softly. "Like you belong here, because you do." The sound of Alexander's footsteps in the hallway made Emma's heart skip. He appeared in the doorway, handsome in his tuxedo, and stopped short at the sight of her. The look in his eyes made her cheeks flush. "The pearls," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Catherine's pearls." "I hope it's okay," Emma started. But Alexander crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hands in his. "It's perfect," he assured her. "You're perfect." He turned to include Lucas in his gaze. "We're all perfect, together." The moment was broken by Mrs. Martinez's gentle reminder that they needed to leave soon. The fundraiser was being held at the city's most prestigious hotel, and they had planned to arrive early, so Lucas could prepare for his speech. The drive into the city was quiet, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Emma's hand remained clasped in Alexander's, drawing strength from his steady presence. Lucas sat across from them, practicing his speech under his breath, occasionally catching Emma's eye with a reassuring smile. They were met at the hotel's side entrance by Jeremy, who had been monitoring the situation. "Monroe's here already," he warned in a low voice. "With his wife. They're working the room, telling their version of events to anyone who'll listen." Alexander's hand tightened on Emma's. "We knew he'd be here. We're ready." The ballroom was a glittering spectacle of crystal chandeliers and floating champagne glasses. As they made their entrance, Emma felt the wave of whispers and stares wash over them. But with Alexander at her side and Lucas ahead of them, she held her head high, Catherine's pearls cool against her throat. James Monroe's voice carried across the room, artificially jovial as he held court with a group of investors. His wife stood beside him, her smile fixed and brittle. When he caught sight of Emma, his laugh faltered for just a moment before recovering. "Here we go," Lucas murmured, wheeling himself toward the stage area where he would later speak. "Time to show them what family really means." The next hour was a carefully choreographed dance of social niceties and strategic conversations. Alexander kept Emma close, introducing her to key board members and benefactors. To her surprise, many of them already seemed to be on their side, having read Jeremy's article and drawn their own conclusions about James Monroe's character. "The foundation's finances are under review," one board member whispered to Alexander. "Things aren't looking good for Monroe's pet projects." Another trustee pulled Emma aside, her elderly face kind but shrewd. "My dear, I knew Catherine well. She would have adored you, especially the way you've helped bring that boy back to life. Don't let anyone tell you you don't belong here." As the time for speeches approached, Emma noticed James making his way toward them, his wife trailing behind like a ghost. But before he could reach them, the lights dimmed, and the hospital director took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special speaker tonight, someone who embodies the spirit of hope and healing that our rehabilitation center represents. Please welcome Lucas Crawford." The applause was polite but uncertain as Lucas wheeled himself onto the stage. Emma held her breath, feeling Alexander's arm slip around her waist supportively. "A year ago," Lucas began, his voice clear and strong, "I thought my life was over. Not just because of this wheelchair, but because I had lost the person who always believed in me, my mother." He paused, his eyes finding Emma in the crowd. "But life has a way of sending us angels when we need them most. Sometimes they come, disguised as pregnant caregivers who refuse to let us give up." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, but it was warm, appreciative. Emma felt tears threatening as Lucas continued, describing his journey from darkness to hope, and the family that had formed in the most unexpected way. "My mother taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about love, about choice, about standing together when the world tries to tear you apart." His gaze moved deliberately to where James Monroe stood, frozen in place. "It's about protecting each other from those who would cause harm, whether through actions or lies. The silence in the ballroom was absolute as Lucas finished his speech, every eye moving between him and the visibly shaken James Monroe. But it was Monroe's wife who moved first, stepping away from her husband with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. "Enough, James," she said, her voice carrying in the hushed room. "I've known about your lies for weeks, about the Foundation's missing funds, about Ms. Sullivan, about everything. It's over." The gasps and whispers that erupted were lost to Emma as Alexander pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. "We've won," he whispered, "together." But as they watched James Monroe's carefully constructed world begin to crumble, Emma felt her baby kick sharply. The evening wasn't over yet, and somehow she knew that this victory, sweet as it was, would come with its own set of challenges. The real test of their newfound family was just beginning. The aftermath of the fundraiser unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony. James Monroe's wife's public declaration set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. By the time they returned to the palace that night, Jeremy's phone was buzzing constantly with new revelations from sources suddenly eager to speak. But Emma barely registered the political and social earthquake they had triggered. Her attention was focused entirely on Lucas, who sat in his wheelchair in the palace library, somehow looking both exhausted and more alive than she'd ever seen him. "Mum would have been proud of you tonight," Alexander said, perching on the arm of Emma's chair. "The way you spoke, the strength you showed, you're so much like her." Lucas smiled, running his fingers over the speech cards in his lap. "I felt her there, you know, not just because of the pearls," he nodded toward Emma's throat, "but because of what we've become, the family she would have wanted us to be." Emma reached up to touch the pearls, still warm from her skin. "I felt her too," she admitted, "like a blessing." "She always said that love was an action, not just a feeling," Mrs. Martinez added, appearing with a tray of tea. The housekeeper's eyes were suspiciously bright. "That real love shows itself in how we protect each other, how we fight for each other." Alexander's hand found Emma's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Speaking of protection, the legal team is moving forward first thing in the morning. Monroe's wife has agreed to provide evidence about the Foundation's irregularities. His entire empire is about to face serious scrutiny." "But that's not what matters most," Lucas interjected, wheeling closer to Emma. "What matters is that he can't hurt you or the baby anymore. You're safe now, you're home." The word home echoed in Emma's heart, bringing fresh tears to her eyes. Pregnancy hormones, she told herself, but knew it was more than that. Home had always been a concept just out of reach, a dream she'd chased, through various apartments and relationships, until now. "There's something else we need to discuss," Alexander said, his voice taking on a note of nervous determination that made Emma look up sharply. "Something I've been wanting to ask for a while now." Lucas suddenly grinned, wheeling himself toward the door. "That's my cue. Come on, Mrs. Martinez. Dad needs some privacy for this." The housekeeper's eyes widened in understanding, and she hurried after Lucas, closing the library doors behind them. Emma's heart began to race as Alexander moved to kneel beside her chair. "Emma Sullivan," he began, taking her hands in his, "when you first walked into this palace, you brought with you more than just hope for my son. You brought life back to these halls, love back to our hearts, and a future I never thought I'd have again." "Alexander," she whispered, but he pressed on. "I know it might seem fast, and some might say we're rushing because of the baby or the situation with Monroe, but they don't know what I know, what Lucas knows, that you were meant to find us, meant to heal us, meant to complete this family." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box different from the one that had held Catherine's pearls. "I'm not asking you to replace Catherine. No one could. But I am asking you to help me honor her memory by building something new, something beautiful, something she would have celebrated." Emma's vision blurred with tears as Alexander opened the box, revealing a stunning emerald ring. The emerald was Catherine's favorite stone, he explained softly. She always said it represented growth and new beginnings, like the spring after a long winter. "It's perfect," Emma managed to say through her tears. "Just like you," Alexander smiled, his own eyes glistening. "Emma Sullivan, will you marry me? Will you help me raise our children, Lucas and this little one, in a home filled with the kind of love that can overcome any obstacle?" Before Emma could answer, a muffled cheer erupted from behind the library doors, followed by Lucas's distinctive laugh and Mrs. Martinez's attempts to shush him. Alexander chuckled, shaking his head. "So much for privacy in this palace," he murmured. Emma laughed through her tears, squeezing his hands. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes to the ring, yes to the family, yes to everything." The library doors burst open as Lucas wheeled in at top speed, Mrs. Martinez hurrying behind him with a champagne bottle and glasses. "I told you she'd say yes," Lucas exclaimed, his face glowing with joy. "I told you it was the perfect time." As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, Emma felt her baby kick enthusiastically, as if adding its own approval to the moment. The emerald caught the library's warm light, sending green sparkles dancing across the books that had witnessed so much of their journey. "To new beginnings," Alexander proposed, raising his glass of champagne while Emma sipped her sparkling water. "To family," Lucas added. "To love," Emma finished, her free hand resting on her belly while the other remained intertwined with Alexander's. Outside the palace windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, and a warm spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering. There would still be battles to fight, challenges to face, a future to build. But here, in this moment, surrounded by the family she had found in the most unexpected way, Emma knew that they would face it all together. Lucas wheeled closer, placing his hand over their joined ones. "Mum would love this," he said softly. "She'd say it was perfect." And somehow, in the warmth of the library, with Catherine's pearls at her throat and Catherine's emerald on her finger, Emma felt the truth of those words. Perfect not because it was flawless, but because it was real, hard-won, and built on the kind of love that could weather any storm. The news of Emma and Alexander's engagement spread through the city's social circles like wildfire, drawing reactions that ranged from heartfelt congratulations to barely concealed skepticism. But within the palace walls, a different kind of transformation was taking place. Lucas had thrown himself into wedding planning with unexpected enthusiasm, his wheelchair becoming a command center of color swatches and flower catalogs. "Mom's garden," he announced one morning, wheeling into the breakfast room where Emma and Alexander were sharing their morning coffee. "That's where you should have the ceremony. It's perfect. Intimate, beautiful, and—" He paused, emotion flickering across his face. "It's where she was happiest." Emma reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Are you sure? We could look at other venues if it feels too soon." Lucas shook his head firmly. "I'm sure. Besides, I've been working with Dr. Chen on something special for the wedding." His eyes sparkled with determination. "He thinks with the new treatment protocol and extra physical therapy, I might be able to stand for short periods by then. Maybe even take a few steps." Alexander's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "Lucas, we don't want you to push yourself too hard. The wedding isn't about—" "It's about family," Lucas interrupted. "And I want to stand beside you both when you say your vows. I want to honor Mom's memory by showing her that we're not just surviving, we're thriving." Emma felt her baby kick, as if in agreement. "Then we'll have it in the garden," she said, softly. "But promise me you won't push yourself too far too fast. We have time." The garden, as it turned out, needed considerable work to restore it to its former glory. Catherine's absence had left it somewhat neglected, though the bones of her vision remained. Mrs. Martinez surprised them all by producing detailed notebooks of Catherine's gardening plans, complete with sketches and seasonal schedules. "She gave them to me for safekeeping," the housekeeper explained. Her usual efficiency softened by memory. "Said someday the garden would need to bloom again when the time was right." As spring deepened into early summer, the garden began to transform. Emma often found herself working alongside the gardeners, her growing belly making some tasks challenging, but not impossible. Alexander would watch from his study window, his heart full at the sight of her bringing life back to Catherine's beloved space. One particularly warm afternoon, Emma was supervising the planting of new rose bushes when heard the distinctive sound of Lucas's wheelchair on the garden path. He had just returned from his therapy session, and his face glowed with triumph. "Watch this," he said, positioning himself near a sturdy garden bench. With careful, deliberate movements, he locked his wheelchair's brakes and gripped the bench's armrest. Slowly, trembling with effort, he began to pull himself upright. Emma's heart leaped into her throat as she watched him rise, his legs shaking but holding. For a brief, beautiful moment, Lucas Crawford stood tall, his mother's determination written in every line of his body. "Lucas," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You did it." "Not for long," he admitted, carefully lowering himself back into his chair. "But it's a start, Dr. Chen says, with more practice." He stopped, looking past Emma with a grin. "Dad, did you see?" Alexander stood frozen in the garden doorway, his eyes bright with unshed tears. In 3 long strides, he reached his son, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "I saw," he managed. "I saw everything." The moment was interrupted by Mrs. Martinez hurrying down the path, waving a newspaper. "You need to see this," she said, her voice urgent. "It's about Mr. Monroe." The headline made Emma's blood run cold. "Monroe Foundation Scandal Deepens, Missing Millions and Hidden Accounts Revealed." Below was a smaller headline that caught her eye. "Monroe's Wife Files for Divorce, Citing Pattern of Deception." "Jeremy's been busy," Lucas observed, reading over her shoulder. "Look, he's quoted Mom's old friends from the charity circuit. They're all coming forward with stories about Monroe's manipulation of foundation funds." Alexander's arm slipped around Emma's waist, protective and steadying. "His lawyers have reached out. They want to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Emma asked, her hand instinctively covering her belly. "Everything. Her settlement to avoid criminal charges, agreements about publicity, and—" Alexander hesitated. "He's offering to sign away all parental rights to the baby." The garden fell silent, except for the gentle splashing of Catherine's restored fountain. Emma looked around at the space that would soon host her wedding, at the roses beginning to bloom, the cleaned marble benches, the freshly gravelled paths. At Lucas, who had found the strength to stand again, at Alexander, whose love had given her a home she never thought she'd find. "Tell his lawyers yes," she said finally. "Not for the money or the publicity, but for closure. This baby deserves to start life free from his shadow." Lucas wheeled closer, taking her hand. "And it will have everything it needs, a home, a big brother, and parents who know what real love looks like." As if in response, the baby kicked strongly, making Emma laugh through her tears. The afternoon sun caught Catherine's restored garden in a golden light, turning the fountain's spray into a shower of diamonds. Somewhere, Emma thought, Catherine was watching, approving, blessing the new life blooming in the space she had loved so well. But even as they celebrated these victories, Lucas's progress, Monroe's comeuppance, the garden's revival, none of them could have predicted the challenge that lay just around the corner, a challenge that would test their newfound strength in ways they never expected, and prove that sometimes the greatest acts of love come from the most unexpected sources. The August heat wave hit the city like a physical force, making the palace's ancient stone walls a welcome refuge. 8 months pregnant now, Emma spent most of her time in the air-conditioned library, helping Lucas with his summer reading while trying to finalize wedding details. The ceremony was scheduled for October, when the weather would be cooler and the garden's autumn flowers would be in full bloom. But life, as they had learned, had its own plans. It started with a phone call from Monroe's lawyers. The settlement papers were ready, requiring only final signatures to make everything official. Against Alexander's protests, Emma insisted on being present for the meeting. "I need to see this through," she explained, adjusting Catherine's pearls around her neck. She had taken to wearing them daily, drawing strength from their connection to the woman who had loved this family first. For all of us. The law firm's conference room was cool and impersonal, with views of the city stretching out below. James Monroe sat at one end of the long table, a shadow of his former polished self. The scandal had taken its toll. His company was under investigation. His marriage was ending, and his carefully constructed public image lay in ruins. What happened next would replay in Emma's mind for years to come. As she reached for the papers that would legally sever James's connection to her child, Monroe suddenly stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking. "Please, just wait." Alexander tensed beside her, but Emma held up a hand. Something in James's face was different, the arrogance gone, replaced by something that looked startlingly like regret. "I need to say something," James continued, looking directly at Emma for the first time since that night at the palace. "What I did to you, it wasn't about you or the baby, it was about me. My fear, my selfishness. Watching your family, seeing how the Crawfords have embraced you, how that boy lights up when he talks about being a brother." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong. About everything." The silence in the conference room was absolute. Emma felt Alexander's hand tighten on hers as James pulled an envelope from his jacket. "This is a trust fund," he said, sliding it across the table. "Set up in the baby's name. Not as a bribe or a way to stay involved, but as an apology. As a way to give this child something better than a father who was too cowardly to love them." Emma's hand shook as she reached for the envelope. "James." "Don't worry," he managed a weak smile. "I'm still signing away my rights. Your family, the Crawfords, that's where this baby belongs. I needed you to know that I understand now what I threw away, what you found." As Emma processed his words, she felt a sharp pain lance through her abdomen, then another. Her gasp brought Alexander to his feet, lawyers forgotten as he recognized the look on her face. "The baby," she whispered. "It's coming." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity, the rush to the hospital, Alexander's steady presence, Mrs. Martinez arriving with her hospital bag, Lucas insisting on being there, his wheelchair positioned firmly in the waiting room. Through it all, Emma held on to Catherine's pearls, drawing strength from their cool touch against her skin. As contractions intensified, she found herself talking to Catherine, asking for guidance, for protection, for the strength to bring this new life into the world. The delivery room buzzed with quiet efficiency as Emma's labor progressed. Alexander never left her side, his quiet support anchoring her through each wave of pain. Outside, Lucas kept everyone updated on his phone, coordinating with Mrs. Martinez and even sending updates to Jeremy, who had become a close friend through all their trials. As dawn broke over the city, painting the hospital room in soft pink, light, Emma's daughter made her entrance into the world with a strong cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of their lives. The nurses cleaned and wrapped her, placing her in Emma's arms while Alexander looked on, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered, touching their daughter's tiny hand with wonder. "Absolutely perfect." When Lucas was finally allowed in, his approach to the bed was almost reverent. "She's so small," he marveled, reaching out to touch his sister's dark curls. "But look, she's got her mama's determination. Look at how strong she grips my finger." Emma watched her family, her real family, gather around her daughter, their love already wrapping the tiny girl in an unbreakable cocoon of protection and acceptance. The baby, as if sensing she was the center of attention, opened her eyes, revealing irises of a striking green that made Mrs. Martinez gasp. "Catherine's eyes," the housekeeper whispered. "She has Catherine's eyes." The truth of it struck them all at once. This baby, born of struggle and fear, but delivered into love and hope, carried a piece of Catherine with her. Not by blood, but by some deeper magic that spoke of family bonds transcending mere genetics. As the morning light strengthened, Emma looked around at her unlikely family. Alexander gazing at their daughter with pure adoration, Lucas already playing the protective big brother, Mrs. Martinez fussing with blankets and taking photos. In her arms, little Catherine Rose Crawford, for they had all agreed on the name months ago, slept peacefully, unaware of the journey that had brought her here, or the love that would shape her future. The perfect moment was interrupted by an urgent text from Jeremy. Monroe's wife just went public with everything, the whole story. You need to see this. But for now, in this sacred space of new beginnings, the outside world could wait. They had more important matters to attend to, like counting tiny fingers and toes, like watching Lucas practice holding his sister, like beginning the next chapter of their remarkable story together. The palace had transformed in the weeks following little Catherine's arrival. The once quiet halls now echoed with the soft sounds of lullabies and gentle conversations. The library, still Emma's favorite retreat, had acquired a comfortable nursing chair, and even Mrs. Martinez's stern demeanor had melted completely in the face of the baby's toothless smiles. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Lucas. His determination to be the best big brother possible had given his physical therapy new purpose. Dr. Chen had been amazed by his progress, and now 6 weeks after his sister's birth, Lucas had mastered standing for several minutes at a time. "Watch this, Katie," he would say to the baby, using his special nickname for her as he gripped his parallel bars. The little one would stare in fascination, her green eyes tracking her brother's movements as he worked to strengthen his legs. Emma often found herself watching these moments from the doorway of Lucas's therapy room, her heart so full it hurt. Alexander would join her sometimes, slipping his arm around her waist as they observed their children bonding. "She's going to grow up knowing nothing but love," he murmured one afternoon, as they watched Lucas reading a story to his captivated sister. "Both of them will." The media storm surrounding James Monroe's downfall had finally begun to settle. His wife's tell-all interview had exposed years of manipulation and financial misconduct, leading to criminal investigations and the collapse of his business empire. But the part that had captured the public's imagination was the story of redemption, how his greatest mistake had led to the creation of a beautiful new family. Jeremy's final article about their story had run in the Sunday edition, featuring a photo of all 4 of them in Catherine's garden. Lucas standing proudly with his supports, Emma holding little Katie, and Alexander beaming with joy. The headline read, "Love redefines family, the true meaning of legacy." "Your mother would have loved this," Mrs. Martinez said one morning, as she helped Emma prepare for a very special day. They were in Catherine's old dressing room, now converted into a bridal suite. The October morning was crisp and clear, perfect for the intimate garden wedding they had planned. Emma smoothed her hands over the simple but elegant wedding dress, her fingers finding Catherine's pearls at her throat. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," the housekeeper replied firmly, adjusting Emma's veil. "She always said love was about growth, about becoming more together than you could be apart. That's what you've given this family, the chance to grow again." A soft knock at the door preceded Lucas's entrance. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his face glowing with excitement and determination. "Ready for your surprise?" he asked, gripping the handles of his walker. Emma turned, and her breath caught. Lucas was actually standing, with minimal support from his mobility aids. "Lucas," she whispered, tears threatening to ruin her carefully applied makeup. "You did it." "I've been practicing in secret," he admitted, taking a careful step forward. "I wanted to walk you down the aisle. Well, part of it anyway. Dr. Chen says I can manage about halfway before I need the chair." Emma crossed the room carefully, mindful of her dress, and hugged him gently. "Having you stand with us at all is more than enough. It's perfect." The garden was a vision of autumn glory. Catherine's roses were in their final bloom, mixed with chrysanthemums and dahlias in warm harvest colors. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, ready for when dusk would fall. During the reception, a small group of their closest friends and family waited in white chairs around the flower-adorned arch where Alexander stood. Little Katie, dressed in a tiny white dress that matched her mother's, was cradled safely in Mrs. Martinez's arms at the front. Her green eyes seemed to sparkle with joy as she watched the proceedings unfold. The moment Emma appeared at the garden path's entrance, with Lucas standing tall beside her, a collective gasp went up from the assembled guests. Alexander's eyes filled with tears as he watched his son take careful, determined steps, escorting the woman he loved toward their future. Halfway down the aisle, exactly as planned, Jeremy waited with Lucas's wheelchair. The transition was smooth, practiced, and somehow added to the beauty of the moment rather than detracting from it. It was real, honest, just like their love. When Emma finally reached Alexander, Lucas positioned himself beside them, standing, again with the help of his walker. The officiant smiled warmly at the unusual but perfect family tableau before beginning the ceremony. "Love," she began, "is not about perfect moments. It's about perfect hearts finding each other in imperfect circumstances. It's about choosing each other, day after day, through every challenge and triumph." As Emma and Alexander exchanged their vows, little Katie let out a happy gurgle, making everyone laugh. The baby's timing was impeccable. Just like her mother before her, she seemed to know exactly when to add her blessing to important moments. "By the power vested in me," the officiant concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As Alexander drew Emma into their first kiss as a married couple, the garden erupted in applause. Lucas cheered from his standing position, his face radiant with joy. Mrs. Martinez wiped tears from her eyes while cradling the baby, and Jeremy, their faithful chronicler and friend, captured it all for posterity. The reception that followed was everything they had hoped for, intimate, joyous, and filled with love. As dusk fell and the fairy lights began to twinkle, Alexander led Emma in their first dance, while Lucas held his sister, both of them swaying gently to the music from his wheelchair. Looking around at her family, her husband's loving gaze, her son's proud smile, her daughter's innocent joy, and the warmth of all those who had supported them through their journey, Emma felt Catherine's presence more strongly than ever. It was there in the garden she had lovingly created, in the pearls at Emma's throat, in the green eyes of the baby who carried her name, and in the strength of the son who had learned to stand again. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was real, built on understanding, forgiveness, and the kind of love that grows stronger through adversity. As the evening wrapped them in its gentle embrace, Emma knew that this was just the beginning of their journey together. There would be more challenges, more triumphs, more moments of growth and joy, but they would face them all as they had faced everything else, together as a family. 2 months after the wedding, on a crisp December morning, the palace buzzed with excitement. Lucas had a major physical therapy evaluation, one that would determine if he could begin transitioning to crutches for longer periods. The whole family gathered in Dr. Chen's office, little Katie contentedly sleeping in her carrier, while Emma and Alexander held hands nervously. "The progress you've made is remarkable," Dr. Chen said, reviewing Lucas's latest scans. "The combination of your determination and the new treatment protocol has exceeded all our expectations. While you'll still need your wheelchair for longer distances and tired days, I believe you're ready for the next step." Lucas's face lit up with the same determination they'd seen the day he decided to walk Emma down the aisle. "Does this mean I can start helping more with Katie, maybe even carry her sometimes?" Dr. Chen smiled warmly. "With proper support and precautions, yes. Your core strength has improved significantly. Speaking of which," he turned to address the whole family, "there's a new clinical trial starting at the rehabilitation center. Given Lucas's incredible progress, I'd like to recommend him as a candidate." Emma felt Alexander's hand tighten on hers as Dr. Chen explained the innovative therapy that combined cutting-edge technology with intensive physical training. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it offered the possibility of even greater mobility and independence. "I want to do it," Lucas said immediately, his eyes shining with purpose. "Not just for me, but for others too. Maybe my experience could help other kids who think they'll never stand again." Emma's heart swelled with pride. This was the same boy who had once refused to leave his room, now wanting to become an inspiration for others. She caught Alexander's eye and saw the same emotion reflected there. That evening, after Lucas had demonstrated his improved standing ability by helping to feed his sister her bedtime bottle with proper support and supervision, the family gathered in the library. It had become their nightly tradition, sharing the day's events, making plans, simply being together. "I've been thinking," Lucas said, watching Katie sleep in Emma's arms, "about Mum. About how she always said everything happens for a reason, even when we can't see it at first." Alexander moved to sit beside his son, his face soft with understanding. "She was wise that way. When the accident happened, I thought nothing good could ever come from it. I was so angry, so lost." Lucas reached out to touch his sister's tiny hand. "But if it hadn't happened, if our lives hadn't been turned upside down, Emma might never have found us. Katie might never have been born. Our family wouldn't be what it is now." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes as Lucas continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm not saying I'm glad it happened. I still miss Mom every day. But I understand now what she meant about reasons and purpose. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us to the best ones." Mrs. Martinez, who had been quietly arranging tea things nearby, paused in her work. "Catherine would be so proud of the young man you've become," she said softly, "of the family you've all built together." As if on cue, little Katie stirred and opened her eyes, those striking green eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of her namesake. She looked around at her family and smiled, one of those heart-melting baby smiles that made everything else fade away. "You know what else Mom used to say?" Lucas asked, wheeling closer to gently stroke his sister's cheek. "She said that love was like her garden. It needed care and attention, but it also needed room to grow wild sometimes, to surprise you with unexpected blooms in unexpected places." Emma looked around the library, at the family photos that now lined the shelves alongside the ancient books. There was their wedding photo in the garden, Lucas standing proud beside them. A candid shot of Alexander holding Katie for the first time, his face a mix of joy and wonder. Lucas in his therapy sessions, determination written in every line of his body, and in the center a restored photo of Catherine, her smile seeming to bless them all. "Speaking of the garden," Alexander said, reaching for a folder on his desk. "I've been working on something, a foundation in Catherine's name, for families dealing with spinal cord injuries, especially children and teenagers. Lucas, I was hoping you might want to be involved, maybe share your story to help others find hope." Lucas's eyes lit up. "Really? You mean it?" "Of course," Alexander smiled. "Who better to show others that challenges can become stepping stones, that families can heal and grow stronger through adversity?" Emma watched her family dream and plan together, her heart full of gratitude. The road ahead would have its challenges. Lucas's new treatment program, the foundation's development, the everyday adventures of raising their children. But they would face it all together, stronger for having found each other in the midst of their darkest moments. Outside the library, windows. The first snow of winter began to fall, dusting Catherine's garden in white. Inside, wrapped in the warmth of family love, little Katie drifted back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by unshakable love. Lucas continued sharing ideas for the foundation, his face animated with purpose. Alexander and Emma exchanged glances full of joy and promise, their hands clasped tight. This was their reality, not a perfect fairy tale, but something far more precious. A family forged through pain and healing, strengthened by understanding and acceptance, and bound together by a love that had bloomed in the most unexpected garden of all. Mrs. Martinez silently refilled their teacups, her usual efficiency softened by affection. In the gentle quiet of the evening, surrounded by books that had witnessed their journey and photos that told their story, the Crawford family continued writing their own unique tale of love, resilience, and the power of new beginnings. As spring returned to Catherine's garden, bringing with it the first anniversary of Emma's arrival at the palace, life had settled into a new rhythm. Little Katie was crawling now, exploring her world with fearless curiosity, while Lucas continued to make remarkable progress in his clinical trial. The Crawford Foundation for Spinal Cord Recovery was taking shape, with Lucas's story inspiring donations and support from across the country. But it was on a quiet Sunday morning that the most unexpected development occurred. Emma was in the garden, Katie secure in her baby carrier as they watched Lucas practice with his new forearm crutches. His therapists had been amazed by his progress in the trial, and he was now able to walk short distances with minimal support. "Mom would love this," Lucas said, carefully navigating the garden path. "Remember how she used to say every flower needs its own time to bloom?" Emma smiled, adjusting Katie's sun hat. She was right about that, just like she was right about so many things. "Speaking of Mum," Lucas paused, his face taking on a serious expression. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you, something important." Before he could continue, Mrs. Martinez appeared on the garden path, her usual composure slightly ruffled. "You have visitors," she announced, "rather unexpected ones." Following her gesture, Emma turned to see James Monroe's ex-wife, Victoria, standing at the garden entrance. But it was the person beside her that made Emma's heart skip, a teenage girl, perhaps 15 or 16, with familiar features and uncertain eyes. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," Victoria said, stepping forward. "But Sarah, my daughter, she needed to come. After everything that's happened, after learning about her father's other family." The girl, Sarah, moved closer, her eyes fixed on little Katie. "So this is my sister," she said softly. The garden fell silent except for the gentle splashing of the fountain. Emma felt Lucas wheel closer to her side, protective but curious. They had known James had a daughter from his marriage, but she had been kept away from all the publicity and scandal. "Half-sister," Lucas corrected gently, surprising everyone. "But in this family, we've learned that blood is the least important part of being siblings." He extended his hand to Sarah. "I'm Lucas, and this little explorer is Catherine. We call her Katie." Something in Lucas's easy acceptance seemed to break the tension. Sarah moved forward, shaking his hand and then kneeling to peer at Katie, who responded with one of her heart-melting smiles. "She has Dad's nose," Sarah observed, then quickly added, "But your smile, it's nice to finally meet you both, all of you." Victoria stepped forward, her elegant composure wavering slightly. "When Sarah learned about everything, about James's actions, about your baby, she had so many questions. We've been in therapy, trying to process it all, and she kept coming. Back to one thing, she has a sister." Emma felt her heart expand with understanding. This wasn't about James or the scandal. It was about two innocent girls who shared a connection, about family ties that transcended the mistakes of others. "Would you like to hold her?" Emma offered, already unfastening Katie's carrier. "She's usually pretty good with new people." As Sarah carefully cradled her baby sister, Lucas caught Emma's eye with a knowing smile. This was what Catherine, the first Catherine, would have wanted. This healing, this acceptance, this growing family circle. Alexander found them all there later, sharing tea in the garden while Katie alternated between Sarah's lap and Lucas's wheelchair. The sight of his family, expanded in this unexpected ways, brought a warm smile to his face. "You know," Sarah said, watching Lucas demonstrate his progress with the crutches, "I always wanted siblings. I used to beg my parents before everything happened. And now I have two, even if it's not the way I imagined." "Family rarely is what we imagine," Alexander said wisely, joining them at the garden table. "But sometimes it's better than anything we could have planned." As the afternoon progressed, plans were made. Sarah would come for regular visits, getting to know her siblings and becoming part of their uniquely blended family. Victoria, seeing her daughter's joy, seemed to release years of tension. "Thank you," she said quietly to Emma as they prepared to leave. For being bigger than the hurt James caused, for letting Sarah have this connection. Emma watched as Sarah said goodbye to Katie, promising to return soon with pictures from her latest school art show. Lucas had already exchanged phone numbers with her, talking about a group chat for siblings. "Love multiplies," Emma said, remembering something Catherine had written in her garden journals. "It doesn't divide." After their visitors left, the family gathered in the library for their evening routine. But tonight felt different, expanded, enriched by the day's events. Lucas was particularly thoughtful as he held his sleeping sister. You know what Mum would say about today, he mused. She'd say that sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow from seeds we didn't plant ourselves. Emma reached for Alexander's hand, feeling the truth of those words deep in her heart. Their family garden continued to grow, sprouting new blooms in unexpected places, each one adding its own unique beauty to their story. Mrs. Martinez, arranging fresh flowers in a vase, smiled knowingly. Catherine always said that love was the best fertilizer, she added, and this family has plenty of that to go around. Outside, the spring breeze carried the scent of new blooms through Catherine's garden, while inside, the warmth of family love continued to nurture each new growth, each new connection, each new chapter in their ever-expanding story. The Crawford Foundation's first major event was scheduled for early summer, coinciding with Lucas's completion of the clinical trial. The palace was buzzing with preparation, as families from across the country would be gathering to share their stories and learn about the innovative treatments that had helped Lucas regain so much of his mobility. Emma found herself in Catherine's garden early that morning, Katie babbling happily in her stroller, while Sarah, who had come to help with the event, arranged name tags and welcome packets. The teenage girl had become a regular presence in their lives, her artistic talent contributing to the foundation's materials, and her gentle spirit helping to heal old wounds. "Do you think there will be other kids my age?" Sarah asked, carefully aligning the badges. "Other siblings of people with spinal cord injuries?" "Actually, yes," Lucas answered, wheeling through the garden path with impressive speed. "Doctor, Chen says several families are bringing their whole support systems. It's not just about the patients, it's about everyone who helps them heal." Emma watched as her stepson navigated the path with confidence, remembering the angry, withdrawn boy she'd met just over a year ago. Now he was preparing to give the keynote speech at the Foundation's event, sharing his journey with others who needed hope. "The first guests are arriving," Mrs. Martinez announced from the garden entrance. "And Mr. Crawford is looking for you, Lucas. Something about last-minute changes to your speech." Lucas grinned, reaching for his crutches. "No changes, Dad's just nervous. He always gets this way before big events." With practiced movements, he transferred from his chair and stood, ready to walk the short distance to the house. "Coming, Emma?" "We'll be right there," Emma assured him, gathering Katie's things while Sarah collected the name tags. "Save us good seats." The palace's grand ballroom had been transformed into a welcoming conference space, with comfortable seating arranged to accommodate wheelchairs and other mobility aids. Photos lined the walls, Lucas's journey documented in images, from those first difficult days through his remarkable progress. And there in the center was Catherine's portrait, her smile watching over everything. Alexander found them as families began arriving, his nervous energy manifesting in constant adjustments to his tie. "Everything looks perfect," Emma assured him, straightening the tie one last time. Catherine would be proud of all of this. "Speaking of pride," he replied, nodding toward the entrance. "Look who just arrived." Jeremy Chen stood in the doorway, camera in hand, but it was his companion that drew everyone's attention. James Monroe, looking older and somehow both smaller and more human, stood uncertainly at the reporter's side. "He asked to come," Jeremy explained quietly as he approached them. "Said he needed to see the good that had come from his mistakes, to understand what real family looks like." Emma felt Alexander tense beside her, but before either could respond, Lucas appeared, standing tall with his crutches. "You should stay," he said to James, his voice carrying the same compassion his mother had been known for. "See how we help families heal, how we turn challenges into stepping stones." James's eyes moved from Lucas to little Katie, who was reaching for her big brother from Sarah's arms, then to his daughter, who met his gaze with a mixture of forgiveness and determination. "I'd like that," he said softly, "if you're sure." The event unfolded like a flower opening to the sun. Families shared stories of struggle and triumph. Medical professionals presented new research, and throughout it all, the spirit of hope and healing filled the air. When Lucas took the stage, supported by his crutches but standing strong, the room fell silent. "A year ago," he began, "I thought my story was over. I had lost my mother, my ability to walk, and my belief in the future. But life had other plans. His eyes found Emma in the crowd, holding Katie while Sarah sat close by. Life sent us an angel disguised as a pregnant caregiver who taught us that family isn't about perfect moments, it's about perfect love in imperfect circumstances. As Lucas continued his speech, sharing his journey and the Foundation's mission, Emma noticed James Monroe wiping tears from his eyes. Beside him, Sarah reached for his hand, offering forgiveness and understanding in that simple gesture. My mother always said that healing happens in layers, Lucas concluded, standing straighter than ever. Like the layers of soil in her beloved garden. First comes acceptance, then hope, then the strength to grow toward the light. This foundation is our way of helping others find their light, their hope, their path to healing. The applause was thunderous, but it was the shared tears and understanding nods that truly measured the speech's impact. As Lucas made his way back to his family, accepting hugs and congratulations, Emma felt Catherine's presence strongly. In the pearls at her throat, in the garden visible through the windows, and in the love that filled the room. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the family gathered in the library for their nightly tradition, Lucas shared something he'd been keeping secret. "Dr. Chen thinks I might be able to walk Katie down the aisle at her wedding," he said, his eyes twinkling. "You know, in about 20 or 30 years, or escort Sarah at her graduation next year," Alexander added, smiling at his stepdaughter. "One step at a time," Emma reminded them, but her heart swelled at their optimism, their ability to dream of future celebrations even as they cherished present joys. Mrs. Martinez, serving their evening tea, paused by Catherine's portrait. "She always said that love was the best medicine," the housekeeper remarked. "I think today proved her right." Outside, the summer evening wrapped the palace in golden light, while inside, a family continued to grow, to heal, to love. They had learned that sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the most beautiful healing, and that family, in all its forms, was the strongest medicine of all. As autumn painted Catherine's garden in rich golds and crimsons, the palace prepared for another milestone, Katie's first birthday. The year had brought so many changes, so much healing, that celebrating their youngest member's special day felt like honoring every step of their journey. Emma stood in the garden, supervising the decoration preparations while Katie took wobbly steps between Lucas and Sarah, who sat a few feet apart, encouraging their baby sister. Lucas, now able to walk short distances with just a single cane, beamed with pride every time Katie reached him successfully. "Can you believe it's been a year?" Sarah asked, catching Katie as she stumbled into her arms. "Sometimes it feels like I've always been part of this family, like I was just waiting to find you all." "That's because you were meant to be here," Lucas replied, holding out his arms as Katie turned and headed back his way. "Just like Emma was meant to find us, and Katie was meant to bring us all together." Mrs. Martinez appeared with a tray of lemonade, her normally stern face soft with affection as she watched the siblings. "The cake is ready, and Mr. Crawford just called. He's on his way back with the surprise." The surprise had been weeks in the planning, Alexander's gift to both his daughters. Emma smiled, remembering how excited he'd been when he first shared the idea with her. Victoria arrived early, helping with the final preparations. The relationship between the two women had grown into a genuine friendship, built on understanding and their shared love for their children. She carried a large, carefully wrapped package that Sarah immediately recognized as an art supply case. "For the nursery mural," Victoria explained, seeing Emma's curious look. "Sarah's been designing it for weeks." Indeed, Sarah had shown a remarkable talent for art, and her latest project was to paint a garden scene in Katie's nursery, incorporating elements of Catherine's beloved garden. It was her way of helping her baby sister know the grandmother she'd never meet. The party guests began arriving. Dr. Chen and his team, Jeremy with his camera ready to capture every moment, families they'd met through the foundation, and even James, who had been making steady progress in rebuilding relationships with both his daughters. Lucas insisted on standing to greet each guest, using his cane with growing confidence. The latest round of innovative treatments had exceeded everyone's expectations, and while he still used his wheelchair for longer periods, his mobility continued to improve. "She's got Catherine's spirit," Mrs. Martinez remarked, watching Katie. "Charm every guest she encountered. That same way of bringing people together, of making everyone feel special." The afternoon was filled with laughter, music, and the kind of joy that comes from truly appreciating life's precious moments. When Alexander finally arrived with his surprise, Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. He carried 2 identical golden lockets, each containing a tiny photograph of Catherine on one side and a family photo on the other. "For my daughters," he announced, presenting them to Sarah and Katie, "so they'll always carry their family close to their hearts." Sarah's eyes welled up as she helped fasten the locket around Katie's neck, then allowed her father to do the same for her. "All of us together," she whispered, touching. The precious gift, past and present. The cake cutting became a family affair, with Lucas holding Katie while Sarah helped guide her tiny hand. Alexander and Emma stood close by, his arm around her waist, both of them marveling at how perfectly their blended family had come together. Later, as the party wound down and the autumn sun painted the garden in golden light, Emma found herself sitting on Catherine's favorite bench, watching her family. Lucas was demonstrating his improved mobility to some foundation families. Sarah was showing Victoria and James her sketches for the nursery mural, and Alexander was dancing with Katie in his arms, her new locket glinting in the fading light. Mrs. Martinez joined her, carrying a worn leather book. "I found this while preparing for the party," she said, handing Emma Catherine's personal journal. "There's something you should read." Emma carefully opened the journal to the marked page, recognizing Catherine's elegant handwriting. "Love, I've learned, is like my garden. It needs room to grow wild sometimes, to surprise you with unexpected blooms in unexpected places. The best gardens aren't the perfectly manicured ones. They're the ones that have space for new flowers to take root, for different species to grow together, creating something more beautiful than any single bloom could be alone." "She knew," Mrs. Martinez said softly. Somehow she knew her family would need room to grow to become something new and beautiful. Emma watched as Lucas called everyone together for a family photo, insisting on standing with his cane. Sarah helped position Katie between them, both girls' lockets catching the light. Alexander's arm slipped around Emma's waist as Jeremy readied his camera. "Perfect," Jeremy declared after taking the shot. "Absolutely perfect." And it was perfect. Not because everything was flawless, but because it was real. Their family garden had grown in ways none of them could have predicted, each new addition making it richer, more vibrant, more alive. As the evening wrapped them in its gentle embrace, Emma realized that Catherine's garden had become more than just a physical space. It was a metaphor for their family, a place where love grew wild and free, where different blooms came together to create something extraordinarily beautiful, where healing and growth were constant companions in the dance of life.